December 9th, 2021, Roswell, Georgia. A 33-year-old man is found unresponsive in his shower 16 days before his birthday. He's pronounced dead. His name, Demaryius Thomas.
A former NFL star, Demaryius Thomas, was found dead in his home last night. He was just 33.
5 Pro Bowls, Super Bowl champion. The NFL called it a tragedy. His family called it something else. This is the story of what the NFL knew, what it ignored, and what it cost a man who gave everything to the game.
He's a guy who gave you everything that he could give you when he stepped between the lines. You love to see that presence that he had when he was on the field.
Demaryius Thomas was born on Christmas Day in 1987 in a small town called Montrose, Georgia. The kind of place where your name doesn't travel far unless you make it. He grew up with his mother, Katina Smith, and his grandmother, Minnie Pearl Thomas, and life moved quietly until he was 11 years old. One morning, before he left for school, police knocked on the door and arrested both his mother and his grandmother on charges of substance distribution. His mother received more than 20 years in federal prison. His grandmother received 2 life sentences, with the possibility of parole only after 40 years. He was just 11. And his younger sister was 3. Have you ever had one morning completely rearrange your childhood? He moved between relatives, eventually settling with his grandmother's oldest daughter and her husband, a preacher. And somewhere in that period, he made a decision that stayed with him. He wrote both their names directly on his arm. "I thought about quitting football," he said later, "but I told them I wouldn't quit something I started. That's part of the reason I wrote their names on my arm. I wanted to remember to never quit." By the time he reached Georgia Tech, scouts had already taken notice. His junior season produced 1,154 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, and when he ran a 4.38-second 40 at his pro day without even competing at the NFL Combine because of a broken foot, Denver had seen enough. They took him in the first round, 22nd overall in 2010, the first wide receiver off the board. When Peyton Manning chose Denver in 2012, he pointed to Thomas as a primary reason. And once they started playing together, it became clear why. Manning's 400th career touchdown pass, a 71-yard strike on opening night against Pittsburgh, went straight to Thomas.
Demaryius Thomas, once again, has beaten the Steelers on a huge play, 71 yards.
Then in October 2014, Thomas caught Manning's 509th, the throw that broke the NFL's all-time record. By then, Thomas wasn't just a good receiver. He was Manning's most trusted target, the one he kept going back to in the moments that mattered. 5 Pro Bowls, 5 straight 1,000-yard seasons from 2012 through 2016. By the time he was done in Denver, only one receiver in franchise history had ever caught for more yards than he did. On February 7th, 2016, Super Bowl 50, Denver beat Carolina 24-10, and Thomas had his ring. But here's the part of that year that meant the most to him. In July 2015, Obama commuted the sentences of 46 nonviolent drug offenders, and Katina Smith was among them. She was released in November 2015 after more than 15 years away, and the first NFL game she ever watched her son play in person was the AFC divisional round against Pittsburgh on January 17, 2016, already his 6th season. Manning handed Thomas the game ball at the final whistle to give to her. Then in June 2016, during the Broncos White House visit, Thomas personally delivered a handwritten thank you letter to Obama, and 2 months after that, his grandmother's sentences were commuted as well. Both women were finally free. The ring was won. The NFL had its story. The player who came from nothing, who never quit, who gave everything and got it all back. And he had quite literally given everything. A torn Achilles tendon in 2011 that doctors thought might end his season before it started. A broken pinky finger in his first practice back from that injury. A concussion as a rookie back in 2010 before anyone in the building was tracking what that might mean down the road. That was the cost of admission, and nobody questioned it because that's just what you do. What the league never told him was what all those years were quietly taking from his brain. There are 2 kinds of hits in professional football, and the difference between them is where this story really turns. The first kind stops the play, flagged, assessed, managed under a concussion protocol. The second kind doesn't stop anything. It happens between the whistles, on nearly every single play, unreported and never counted. Helmet accelerometer studies show NFL players absorb somewhere between 500 and 2,000 of those impacts per season. Boston University research found the risk of developing CTE doubles for every 2.6 years played, and that total years of exposure, not concussion count, drives the damage. Thomas played 10 seasons. He had one documented concussion on record, back in 2010, his rookie year. What never made it into any record is what his mother told the New York Times about the night Denver won Super Bowl 50. He had taken a hard hit during the game, and by the time the celebration started, the headache was bad enough that he couldn't stay. There was no protocol entry and no report, just a Super Bowl champion who went home early because the pain wouldn't let him be there. Then, in February 2019, Thomas lost control of his vehicle on Auraria Parkway in Denver, traveling over 70 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone before the car crossed a median, went airborne, and rolled end over end multiple times, striking his head on the windshield before it finally came to rest.
Demaryius Thomas suffered minor injuries after rolling his car in Denver early this morning.
He pleaded guilty to careless driving. For a while, it looked like he'd walked away from it clean. But by the fall of 2020, the seizures started. Severe, unpredictable, little or no warning. He wrecked other cars. He fell down steps. Ozone therapy failed. Hyperbaric chamber treatment failed. So Thomas did what professional football conditions players do with pain they can't explain. He hit it. Can you imagine going through that completely alone, telling almost no one because the culture you've spent 10 years inside of taught you that that's what you do? His father watched him grow paranoid. He barely left the house without a gun. He lost track of conversations. He woke up every single morning with a headache that wouldn't quit. His mother watched him pull away from everyone. "I don't feel like myself anymore," he told her. He retired in June 2021, not because the career was over on the field, but because the seizures made playing impossible. 6 months later, he was gone. But here's what nobody around him knew at the time, what no scan and no protocol had ever caught. While Thomas was still walking onto that field every Sunday, something was already changing inside his brain, quietly, with no symptom anyone could yet point to a name. The question this entire story turns on is the one the NFL has never answered directly. What did the institution already know about that kind of damage? And what did it choose to do with that knowledge while he was still playing for them? After Thomas died, his family made a decision that would turn his death into the clearest evidence yet of what football had actually done to him. They donated his brain to the Boston University CTE Center. In July 2022, the results came back. Stage 2 chronic traumatic encephalopathy. He was one of at least 345 former NFL players posthumously diagnosed with the disease, out of 376 studied. That's a rate of 91.7%. Now, sit with that for a second, because a separate BU study of more than 160 brains from the general public found exactly one case of CTE, and that case was a former college football player. But those are just the brains researchers happen to study. Nobody actually knows how many other players, the ones who never got donated, never got studied, are walking around carrying the exact same thing Thomas did. Stage 2 CTE comes with a specific set of symptoms: depression, anxiety, paranoia, memory loss, behavioral changes that the people closest to a patient can see clearly long before anyone has a name for what they're watching. Dr. Ann McKee, director of the BU CTE Center, who's diagnosed over 70% of CTE cases worldwide, put it plainly: CTE itself does not cause death. What it does is change your behavior and your personality. When Thomas's father heard doctors walk through that list, he stopped them.
When they started explaining side effects, warning signs, and that's when the bell started ringing. When they said it, I was like, man, he was doing that. He did that too.
And here's the part that no one really expected. 16% of all confirmed CTE cases involve people who never had a single diagnosed concussion in their entire career. Subconcussive contact alone is enough to cause it. The NFL's concussion protocol manages acute events. CTE isn't an acute event. It builds between practices, between seasons, across years, while every protocol on the sideline is looking the other way entirely. And that's really the heart of the problem. Look at what the league actually spent its money on after the pressure built up. Helmet research, protocol rollouts, things that look good in a press release. What it never spent money on was an independent, long-term study of players while they were still active. It never built any real screening system to catch this early, and it never once acknowledged publicly that the hits nobody flags, the quiet ones on almost every play, were doing damage just as real as the ones that stopped the game. That was the gap. The system was built to manage a moment on the field. It was never meant to manage a decade inside someone's skull. This isn't new to the league either. When forensic pathologist Bennett Omalu first identified CTE in a former player's brain in a 2002 Pittsburgh Steeler, Mike Webster, the NFL's medical committee didn't expand the research. It tried to get his peer-reviewed paper retracted, a step journals usually reserve for fraud, not for findings an institution doesn't want to hear. When Thomas's diagnosis went public, every outlet covering it noted the same thing. They reached out to the NFL. No response was ever recorded. But the part of this story that's easiest to miss is buried inside the settlement itself, not in the diagnosis. The NFL's concussive fund, now over $1.2 billion, was built on a method called race norming, assuming a lower cognitive baseline for black players, making it statistically harder for them to qualify for a payout. It was in the settlement from 2015, exposed by a lawsuit in 2020, and the NFL only pledged to end it on June 2nd, 2021, after public pressure made it impossible to ignore, with the practice formally removed from the settlement the following year. Lawyers estimated that white former players were qualifying at 2 to 3 times the rate of black players, in a league that was roughly 70% players of color. Demaryius Thomas was one of them. The NFL's response to CTE has followed the same pattern for over 25 years. Dispute the findings, delay acknowledgments, then announce safety investments once the pressure gets too loud to absorb. Helmet campaigns and protocol rollouts function as liability management, not real player protection. The concussion settlement came with no admission of fault. No internal records were ever produced. The case settled before much evidence was even exchanged. And buried inside that deal was something most fans never noticed. The players who signed onto it gave up their right to sue the league individually in exchange for whatever the fund decided to pay them. Whatever the league knew, and whenever it knew it, stayed protected behind a structure built that way on purpose. The settlement doesn't even cover CTE, because CTE can only be confirmed after death, the one disease found in 91.7% of studied players, the same disease Thomas had, can't trigger a payout while any of those players are still alive to ask for one. Thomas's mother spent more than 15 years in federal prison, came home, and finally watched her son play. She was there for the ring, the White House, his grandmother coming home, and then he died at 33, and she had to decide what to do with his brain. She made that decision based on something he had told her, long before either of them knew what was happening inside his head.
At first, I didn't want to do it. I was against it. And then I remember a conversation DT and I had where he said that, Mom, if anything ever happens to me, I want to be able to help other players.
The Fulton County Medical Examiner ruled the cause of death as complications of seizure disorder and added this line directly to the report. It is unknown whether the seizure disorder resulted from head trauma sustained during his professional football career, and after 3 decades of protocols and settlements and safety campaigns, that's still the answer his mother was given. Think about what that actually means. Every ticket sold, every jersey bought, every single Sunday spent in front of a screen, that's money that built $1 billion settlement fund, and it still couldn't buy Demaryius Thomas or 344 other players diagnosed right alongside him a straight answer about what the game was doing to their heads while they were still out there playing it. He gave the league 10 seasons. The league built a fund big enough to look like it was making things right. It just wasn't built for him. Demaryius Thomas wasn't a cautionary tale. He overcame a childhood that would have broken most people, built one of the most celebrated careers in NFL history, and used every bit of it to fight for his family. The system that profited from his body never protected it, and when he needed real answers, there was nothing there to give him. If this story matters to you, hit the super thanks button. It keeps this series going. Subscribe, because the next story will blow your mind.